Alright, guys, welcome back. So, if we left off talking about the Roaring Twenties, then what I want to do now is talk about, in brief, the Great Depression. And pretty much, again, your essay question, I would pull from the Roaring Twenties, pull from this one, pull from the New Deal. So, these next, this series of 3 lectures covers what would be the worst depression in American history. I mean, even the Great Recession of 2008, as bad as it was, did not quite really come close to this. So what we're going to see is what happens. Remember that concept of overproduction I talked about? Well, it's the same stuff. Factories are just making more stuff than people could consume. Businesses will have to start laying people off again. If Sony builds 400 PlayStation 4s and only, sells 200, well, that next year it needs to lower how much it produces. But companies aren't going to pay full price for you to do half the work, so they're going to lay people off. What that then means is now that you have people without jobs, and so they can't buy the product. So again, the cycle just hang on. Here we go. The cycle just repeats. It's a vicious cycle. And the issue is people, if we look today, our health of the American economy, we look at, gross national product, and we look at how much people make and employment. What is the unemployment rate? That's what we look at. But here, people look at manufacturing. How much stuff is business making? So they don't look at the fact that overproduction is in itself a bad flaw. Hang on just a second. All right, there we go. Turned on a fan. So they don't look at that overproduction is in itself a bad flaw. They instead say that's how we tell the economy is doing good. That's how we know the economy is doing good. So the economy is frail. The problems that will cause the Great Depression are already there, but nobody looks at them. We see that because nobody looks at agriculture, which never recovers from the post-war collapse of 1919 to 1921. There's even going to be a recession in 1927. People just stop buying as much, but people don't look at that. They just let this happen. The same stuff we hear today about how a company is too big to fail. Quite literally, that was the same mindset here. The American economy is too big to fail. Just keep going, and it's going to be fine. Keep going, and it's going, people said there's no way this could ever stop. Other problems besides overproduction is overconsumption. Okay, we have underconsumption and overconsumption both going on. And I know it's really weird, so stick with me. This is a history class, so I know the economics is going to boggle all of us, but, let's deal with it. With underconsumption, what I mean, that's tied in with overproduction. Factories are making more than we consume. I can buy, okay, let's see. I've got, I'm a gamer here in my, home office here. I've got 2 board games here. Okay, this is how much I can produce in a month, or buy in a month. But if a company targets and expects me to buy 4 board games a month, I can't do it. So underconsumption means I simply can't buy enough. So then that company, which is banking on me to buy it, they go out of business. Now overconsumption is where my budget allows me to buy 2 board games, but instead I say, you know what? I'm going to, buy on credit. So even though my budget says I can only buy 2, instead I'm going to buy 4. Okay. What that then means, overconsumption, I'm buying more than my budget can withstand. I am living outside of my means. We see that here with the problems of credit. In 1910, General Motors sold 39,300 cars. That's just here's the cash, give me the car, we're good. In 1924, that was 587,341. Okay, so now we're selling 500,000 cars. People just, whipping out the $290, here you go. But let's look at cars bought on credit, okay, in, 1919 to 1925. 1.1 million. 1.1 million cars bought on credit. So in a period here of 1924 where people are like that, how many of that's actually being bought on credit? And if you look, that's $810 million that a business thinks it's made, but all of that are just loans from a bank. That is a problem. People are starting to live, beyond their means. Think about it. How many of you guys have credit cards? How many of you guys have ever maxed it out? I'll raise my hand. It happens. You see, how do you think about most of these things, You see things you want, you buy it. But the issue is, eventually, that's a problem. Or if, everybody keeps doing it. It makes it look like the economy is healthier than it actually is. Then if we take that and we take a brilliant government plan, the 1924 Dawes Plan. Now this is different than the Dawes Severalty Act. But what happens is, remember, if American people can't consume all the stuff factories are making, find markets elsewhere. And Germany seemed like a natural solution. Remember, Germany, under the Treaty of Versailles, we've established that Weimar government. And the Weimar government's economy is in the toilet, quite literally. German money was so worthless, you could take stacks of 1,000 Deutsche Reichsmarks and use them as Lego bricks that don't hurt like hell when you step on them. And that's what kids would do, because the money is worthless. If you were in Weimar, Germany in 1924, and you went to go to a restaurant, you paid for your food before you got it, because in the, say, hour it took to eat your meal, the food, the money would devalue and the food would cost more. That's how bad the economy was. So what we're going to see is the United States said, okay, what if we loan Germany, let's loan Weimar Germany money to help its economy. If we then do that, we get everybody to stop occupying Germany, we can rebuild Germany, make it recover, then Germany can then buy our stuff. They can buy our crap. We've got a little handy-dandy chart because it's kind of complicated. The problem is, we loan Germany $2.5 billion. They then take $2 billion of that and pay it on the war reparations they loan to the Allies. The Allies then take that money plus $600 million and pay all of that to the United States for stuff they own us. What that means, if we boil it down, okay, that's not unlike taking a MasterCard to pay off your Visa card bill, then you take that Visa card and then pay off the MasterCard. Why can't you do that? Because it doesn't work. There's no actual money there. From the American system, it looks like money is being pumped into the American economy. It looks like the war debts have been paid. It looks like we've rebuilt Germany, so now, hey, everybody can start buying our stuff. But the fact is, it's all our money that we loaned. There's no actual improvement. Germany doesn't recover. The Allies don't recover. They don't buy our products. And so the economy, once again, now it starts to shake. The economy is shaky, and nobody does anything. Nobody pays attention. And then we get even stupider, okay? By the 1920s, the stock market became an absolute fascination. It became an American obsession. And we're going to see that business owners start to invest in the stock market. This is where they can make up money. Of common people, okay? 3 million people actively owned and traded stock. A few people would have owned some, but it becomes enough that in the newspapers of the day, they would start printing stock market techniques. It becomes enough if you take your iPhone, okay, and like in my case, I scroll down, the first thing it shows me, there are stocks, because it's that much of a national fascination that we just, everybody wants to trade stock. This became an obsession, and everybody knew somebody who traded on the stock market. Maybe they just owned 1 or 2 shares, but we all knew them. And so what happens is, as more and more people trade on the stock market, it goes up. So people look at overproduction, they look at the stock market, and they think the economy is doing fantastic. They don't look at the problems with the Dawes Plan. They don't look at the problems of overconsumption. They don't look at the problems of underconsumption or overproduction. They don't look at the problems of agriculture. It's just building and building and building for a decade. But all people see is this. All people see are people in wealthy business suits doing all sorts of trading, and they think this is going to be fantastic. And then we get one of the dumbest things in human history. And I want you, please, in your notes, which I just presume you're taking, to write where you think that at any point this actually sounds like a good idea. In order to facilitate more people buying stocks, we would have 2 different things. We would first have what was called buy on margin. And the buy on margin was if you wanted to buy a piece of stock worth $100, okay? You only had to put up a margin of the price. You only had to put up 10%. So if I want a $100 share of, say, Microsoft, okay, I pay $10, and now I own a $100 share. Then when I sell that, if that $100 share jumps up to $150, I then sell that, pay off, okay, what I owe, and I've just made a huge, I've just made $60 profit for $10. I mean, that's the world it is. The money's not there. What happens if, and then that doesn't sound so bad. But then banks give out stupid loans that can't be verified. Understand this. There's no banking regulation, okay? There is absolutely no banking. Quite literally, it's Jim's Bank of Stillwater giving me a loan to buy stuff on the stock market. I mean, that's as dumb. It might sound dumb, but that's exactly how it was. And understand, banking regulation is always a problem. Look at the Great Recession of 2008. One of the causes was that banks were making loans to people they knew could not pay it off. So let's say, the person wants to buy a $150 or $150,000 house. $150 house would be pretty crappy. But a $150,000 house. The bank could then look and say, well, you're at risk. Okay, this is not a good investment. The bank then charges you a stupid high interest rate, makes you the loan, then they sell that loan to another bank. So the first bank makes its money back while it gets put off to the second bank. When the second bank can't collect, it then sells it to a third, and just on and on, and the loan gets bounced around, and it makes it look like there's more money than there actually is. Well, that's what we see here. Banks would make loans to people, say, okay, you want, $100 loan for the stock market, here you go. Well, then you go buy 10 stocks, so you buy $1,000 worth of stock for $100. If that stock doubles in value, okay, then you've just made $1,000, but you've only actually put $1,000 into the system. I mean, that's how bad it is. And so this happens over and over. The stock market explodes. It just goes up and up and up almost overnight. People think it's absolutely amazing, and people look at this and they say the economy is doing amazing. And, I'm gyrating with my hands to show the impact. And then, as if that's not bad enough, businesses realize, wait a minute, we're losing money because we're producing more stuff than people can consume. Let's play the stock market. Let's actively take a bunch of our profits, invest it in the stock market. We can make more money that way. So now you've got all of this investment, and it looks like more money is in the economy than there actually is. It looks like businesses are more successful than they actually are, and everything just looks fantabulous. Now, you're a trader here at the New York Stock Exchange. Your stock hiccups, and okay, if that stock goes south, you lose that money, the bank calls in the loan, you've got to run to your bank, and you've got to get money. Now, if you do that now, okay, the stock, your $100 stock just tipped to 98. What do? Well, you wait it up, and it tips to 96. What do? Tips to 95. What do? If it just goes down, eventually you want to sell. Because if you buy, the way the stock market works, hopefully you all know this, if I buy a $100 share of stock, okay, and then the value goes up to 120. I sell it, I get $120. But if I buy a $100 share of stock and it plummets to $20, I sell it, I only get that $20. I am out the other 80 I invested. The thing is, okay, what we're going to see is people are worried about it. So one guy sells. He sells everything. Then the next guy next to him gets spooked, and he sells everything. The guys next to him get spooked. They sell everything. And we see a massive sell-off. Because people have to sell off the stock to try to save money, because those banks are going to call in loans if they perceive the stock market's going south. They want their money. If they've made you a $100 loan, but your stock's not only worth 20, they don't get their money. So they're going to call it in before it's worth. So it just creates this panic. And on October the 24th, 1929, Black Thursday, the market absolutely collapses. It collapses on the 24th. It rallies a bit, and then, let's see, hang on, 24, 25. Then on Black Tuesday, the 29th, it just, boom. It just nosedives. The stock prices falter. People sell. There becomes a panic, and people lose money. Okay, what happens is people, lose their money in the stock market, so they have to go to the bank to get savings to pay their debts. Well, the way a bank works, and I've explained this before, but it's oh so pertinent with the Great Depression. And if you've got, older family members who lived during the Great Depression, they might not trust banks for this very reason. There's no FDIC. There's no Federal Deposit Insurance Commission. Okay, now, if there's $250,000, if I have got $250,000 in a bank, like that's ever going to happen, if I have that money in the bank and the bank collapses, the government ensures I get that money back. It's insured. If I have more than $250,000, sucks to be me. Now, what would happen is how banks work. You deposit money in a bank, particularly in a savings account. That bank then loans that money out to other people. That's why you get interest. That's what the bank pays you for letting them loan out the money. The problem is, okay, if that bank has made a bunch of loans, so it has, let's scale down numbers. One bank has 10 people, 10 patrons, okay, and they're each patron has $1,000 in the bank, okay, so that's $10,000 in the bank. Well, if that bank has made $10,000 in loans, okay, then if everybody tries to get their money, that's a problem. But there's no banking regulation. It's paper money at some point. So what if the bank makes $11,000 in loans? Or the bank makes $12,000 in loans, okay? The bank's going to have its own ready cash. So now if all 10 people try to get their money out, there's no money left in the bank. So or if the bank has just loaned, all that. Or if the bank has loaned, or actually what's more let's say the bank has loaned out $5,000, but you've got 10 patrons each with $1,000. The first 5 guys that go to the bank want their $1,000. Here you go. Well, the next one, sorry, the money's not here. We loaned it out. We don't have the money. We can't give you the money. Well, then the other 4 guys come in. They want their money. The bank can't do it. The bank has one of 2 choices. It can call in the loan and then tell people, hey, we need you to pay the money now, or it can just close. Now, what would happen is Bank A would then call in its loans. So then everybody that had a loan at Bank A would then go to their banks and try to draw out their money, which then forced those banks to call in their loans. So then those people go, and then eventually the banks just start having to close because nobody has the money to pay the loans. The banks have literally squandered all the money, and so the banks just collapse and close. If we look, okay, Wall Street in new panic. At first they thought it was a panic, just like every other depression. The Great Depression kicks off in 29, but it really doesn't become a depression until 1930. If we look, the stock market, okay, it stumbles in 29, rebounds a little bit, and then just boom, by 1932, it is in shambles. That bank run, you're going to get things like this. $100 will buy this car, must have cash, lost all on stock market. Okay, that car, remember, cost him $290, $300. He needs money. This guy probably lost literally everything. He lost probably his life savings, all the money he had in the bank, and now he's got banks telling him he's got to pay his loan because that bank's trying to, his bank closed. He lost everything, but the bank he had the stock market loan with wants him to pay up because it's trying to keep from closing. It just snowballs. Within weeks, prices, the stock market, everything tumbles to how it had been in 1927. But it doesn't recover. It doesn't fix. And then in 1930, boom, we actually have full-on depression. Consumer confidence has fallen. You don't know when your bank's going to fail. You don't, people are losing their jobs. People are going to get fired. You don't know if that's going to happen to you. Okay? Again, I like board games. I'm not buying many of these if I think I'm going to lose my job. So if I'm worried about the economy, I don't buy stuff. Well, that then means the guy that makes these board games loses his job, okay? So now he can't buy stuff. So, if he can't buy my product as an educator, then I lose my job, and boom, it just snowballs. Banks keep failing. People keep losing their money. Eventually, businesses start jacking up their prices to make up for the profits and slashing wages. Well, guess what? Jerk off the prices, jack up the prices, kind of a different thing. If they jack up the prices, okay, but my wages are lower, I can't buy that stuff, and the problem just exacerbates. Businesses collapse, and by 1930, it is the worst depression in American history. There's massive resentment. Nobody knows how to fix it. And this is going to take an entire decade. The title of the slide, I said 1922 to 1939. That's just the period we're covering, because 33 to 39 we'll call the era of the New Deal. Please, and I'm going to say this now, on one of the questions I will ask, what ends the Great Depression? It is the Second World War. It's the sudden massive need for a lot of new jobs, building tanks, planes, guns, guys in uniform. Okay, the Depression by no means ends in 1933. That's just when we get a new president that actually wants to do something to try to end it. So there's uncertainty on how to fix anything. Nobody really knows how. You're going to have stuff like this if we want to look at the Depression. Stuff like the people waiting in line for a soup kitchen. Okay, it's quite literally bread lines, just trying to get free food. Next to a billboard, the world's highest standard of living. There's no way like the American way. Or if we want to see, just some of, what the Depression looked like. Okay, here's a Seattle Hooverville. I've got a bigger picture later on. If you wanted to try to get a job, you would do one of two things. You'd either stand on a street corner with a billboard or a sign, or you draft your kids. Why can't you give my dad a job? Or like this, Rarig's kid doesn't starve. Why should we? Do something to guilt people into giving you a job because, the unemployment rate, okay, is going to skyrocket to about 25%. What that means is 1 out of every 4 Americans that want a job cannot get one. That job just does not exist. You see things like this, the mother and her kids, just the uncertainty. They're in a Hooverville. I mean, it's damp and dirty and dark, but they don't know what to do. And a Hooverville would just be these temporary tent or wooden shack cities that would just spring up because people are going to lose their homes. If you can't pay your mortgage, banks are just going to kick you out because they want to try to sell that. Remember, a bank exists for profit. It doesn't exist to help you. Businesses exist for profit, not for the worker. They're going to do whatever they can to ensure their own survival. So people are going to get laid off. And unfortunately, African Americans are among the first to do so. Many leave the South in World War I to get jobs. They're in the North that racism hits, and they're gone. Immigrants, roughly around 50% of all Hispanic immigrants are going to be deported in the 1930s. People are going to lose their homes and flee to these Hoovervilles. And the really sad thing is we don't live in a welfare state yet. Okay? Whether or not you like welfare, whether or not you like unemployment insurance, healthcare, Social Security, whatever, consider this, okay? At some level, a government should have some responsibility to its citizens. That doesn't exist in the 1920s. In the 1920s, if you're out on your ass, it sucks to be you. That is the official position of the United States government. They're going to call for volunteerism. They're going to say, well, it's not our job to do anything. This is the era of laissez-faire economics. Laissez-faire meaning hands-off. The government has neither the right nor the obligation to interfere with the economy. So if you lose your job, you'll have the President of the United States, Herbert Hoover, saying, well, so, other Americans should step in. You should help your fellow Americans, but the government won't give you any sort of assistance. There's also the problem that the middle class, the American middle class, born during the Gilded Age, refuses to ask for charity. They see it as beneath them, undignified. Many would rather commit suicide than seek help. You're going to see in many cases, they're going to shoot themselves. Or a common thing, a gas oven or stove, you bar the windows, bar the doors, turn on the gas, and asphyxiate yourself. That was seen as preferable than asking for help. Meanwhile, others are going to be so desperate for jobs, they're going to migrate all across the country. Think the grapes of wrath, okay? People from Oklahoma who pack up and walk from here to California for the promise of being fruit pickers. It's just because that's the only job people know actually exists. And they're going to be abused. The pay is going to be horrible. Several of them are going to die. And we're going to see it become so bad. Here's a Hooverville, by the way. We're going to see the rise of anti-vagrant ordinances. Because, cities were like, look, jobless men, keep going. We can't take care of our own. And this idea that, you don't want people from Stillwater walking down to Oklahoma City to try to get jobs that Oklahoma City people are competing for. So anti-vagrant jobs, if you don't have a job, well, they're not going to jail you because then they have to feed you. They'll just kick you out of the city. And you'll just be forced to live in a Hooverville outside the city. So then you walk to the next town and be disappointed you walk to the next town. And eventually you might end up in California where you realize those fruit picker jobs were nothing but fantasy. If you wanted to apply for a job. And by the way, this is still the era. Didn't matter if you were dirt poor. You still dressed in a suit and tie. That's just what you did. But what you would do is you would stand like on a street corner with these signs. Wanted a decent job. Family man, age 44. I'm a veteran, here's what I can do. or, age 37, war veteran, just the stuff. List your qualifications, hoping that somebody walking or driving by would see you and say, hey, I can give you some sort of a job. That was the hope of what you could do. And again, the government does not help, okay? Not until 1933 when we get Franklin Roosevelt. The Republican attitude, unfortunately, again, laissez-faire. Herbert Hoover is not the president for the Depression. He said voluntarism. He calls on business owners. He says, business owners, don't cut wages. Don't jack up your prices. Pay a fair wage. But if you're a business owner, if you're not legally obligated to do that, screw that. You're going to stay in business. You're going to do what you can to make a profit. There's also now the Depression is worldwide, so there's no real relief. There's no escape. It's something that everybody, unfortunately, has to deal with. Now, very, very late, like 1932, Hoover will finally cut taxes, start to push for public works projects, create a federal farm board, but it's all too little and too late. And in the case of the federal farm board, which now finally the government's going to, seize on agriculture, they do the dumbest thing possible. They say, okay, to jack up prices on livestock, we will pay you to slaughter your pigs, your cows, all that stuff. Just slaughter them, kill them, bury them. Now the whole idea, restrict the food supply so prices come up. The problem is, okay, you have all of these people that are literally starving who need that food, but they don't get the food, because if they get the food, the farmers take a hit. So people say the government is blatantly favoring big business. They want agriculture to stay in. They want farmers to stay in, but they don't care about the little guy. And unfortunately, we can see the government's priorities in 1932. And it's ironic, I'm going to talk about this on Veterans Day, because understand, veterans, thank you for your service. We owe you a great debt. But look at it today, okay? We see things like the VA scandal, or I know many veterans who say that they just don't bother with the VA hospitals because, they're absolute crap. I don't know, that's just what they tell me. We see things like Bernie Sanders, like, how can we send people off to war but not pay for them once they come home? How many veterans are homeless? How many veterans commit suicide? We don't deal with that. Unfortunately, the American attitude towards veterans was a little worse in 1932. After the First World War, what we're going to see is veterans were promised a bonus to be paid in 1945. I've always thought it ironic that they promised a bonus at the end of the Second World War, but they didn't know there was going to be another World War. And the thought was, okay, if you're still alive, 20, 30 years after, well, what would that be, 1918, 27 years after the First World War, we'll pay you some money. We're going to help you in your old age. Again, there's no old age pension. Social Security doesn't exist yet. But veterans were chronically hit, they were hit hard in the Great Depression. So in 1932, 43,000 of them assemble in Washington, D.C. And their basic stance was, look, a bonus in 1945 is not going to help us. But a bonus now means that we're not going to starve. We want you to pay us the bonuses early. And the thing is, Hoover refused. He did not want the government to take that step. He's also worried because, again, we're coming off the Red Scare. Okay, crowds like this outside government buildings, that's how the Russian Revolution started. That's how Tsarist Russia became the Soviet Union. There's fear that these guys are commies. And so Hoover orders General Douglas MacArthur to drive the bonus army out of Washington. This is the same Douglas MacArthur that will fight in World War II. This is the same Douglas MacArthur that will fight in Korea. This is the same Douglas MacArthur that in 1952 will make a presidential bid and lose to Eisenhower. And MacArthur is no fan of communism. Now, why I'm saying this is rather than politely ask them to leave, rather than just wait them out, the United States Army, with rifles, tanks, guys with bayonets fixed, and tear gas, drove out American veterans. Put these guys to the point of a gun and a bayonet and drove them out. Then they came in with flamethrowers and burned out the Hoovervilles. A couple of people died. And so understand, and in some cases, there were guys in the Army who had fought alongside the veterans, not, this is 32, not what, 15, I'm going to do math, 14 years earlier, But it's the case of, this is how we treated veterans in 1932. They simply wanted a bonus, which they were promised, paid to them when it would do them some good, and the army attacked them. Tanks, cavalry, machine guns, rifles with bayonets. Now, granted, only a handful of people died, but it's still thought that this is the government's response to peaceful veterans. And so we're going to see that the big significance of this is it puts down the bonus army, and it ruins Hoover's chances of getting reelected. Again, it's one thing to read about it. It's one thing to hear about it on the radio, but if you see this in newsreels, okay, and generally movies about the only way to escape the hell of the Great Depression, this, turned people's stomachs, as I hope it does yours right now, today on Veterans Day. So if we look at the election of 1932, okay, and this is probably, again, one of a defining election in American history, Hoover's image was tainted. Okay, he didn't stop the Depression. His policies weren't working. Banks are failing. Bankruptcy is skyrocketing. Business is failing. Unemployment is rising. And now you've got the bonus army in an election year. Now, the new candidate, I'm going to click. I don't know why I screwed up, but, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, okay, his policy was he wasn't saying, hey, we're going to do this, this, and this, and this. He said, I promise you a new deal. And if you elect me president, I will try things that have not been tried before. And that was good enough for the American people. He was charming. He was charismatic. He was hopeful. He was also Theodore Roosevelt's cousin, so there's that family connection. And more than that, he promised change. Hoover, through the whole thing, the whole bit about laissez-faire economics and voluntarism, had said that, look, we just have to wait this out. Wait out the Great Depression. Wait it out, the market will adjust, and everything will be fine. That's clearly not working. It's been 3 years. FDR says, no, we are going to do something different. We're going to do what's not been tried before. And that resonated well with American people. 3, 4, 5, 6 states. Okay, we can maybe side with Hoover. But we're going to see that, this guy is going to sweep the vote. 6 million more in the popular vote. 413 more in the electoral. I mean, this is a landslide by any definition of the term. He's charismatic, he's convincing, and also people saw him as a success story. He had been born wealthy. He was the Undersecretary of the Navy in World War I. A great life. But then in 1921, he was felled by polio. Thank you, anti-vaxxers. Actually, no, there was no vaccine for polio just yet. But, this is why. He had been felled by it. He barely had the use of his legs. But he fought back. He said, I'm not going to just go away. He becomes governor of New York in 1928. He becomes charismatic, and he becomes the only president in American history to be elected for not just 2, not just 3, but 4 terms. This was, at the time, one of the most popular American presidents in American history. Now, one thing about the polio, and again, it's charismatic. Look at these photos. What do you not see? You don't see his legs. Try to find a photo of Franklin Roosevelt where you see his legs. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to say not going to happen. You might. But they're very rare because this guy, what he did is he wanted to cultivate a certain image. Okay? So, whereas today, we have, look at a politician, and they're like, or, what is it? Biden chomping down on ice cream looking really goofy, or, the Obama, like, with the beard, like, not bad, Whereas today we try to find the goofiest pictures of presidents and presidential candidates. Here, what FDR said is, look, this is the image I want you to portray. If you ever, and he told this to reporters, media outlets, whatever, if you ever do anything to use my polio against me, I will burn you. You will not be invited to the White House. You will not get stories. You will not be in the loop. And so even FDR's critics had that respect, because there was more respect for the presidential office at the time. I both love and hate that presidential candidates go on Saturday Night Live. I honestly can't decide how I feel about that, because I think it's both really hilarious and yay, it knocks them down a peg. They're just like us. On the other, where's the dignity of the office? But along with that, I can't wait for the indecision 2016 stuff next year, but there was more respect for the office. So the American media not only did this, but there's going to be a video I'm going to post at the end of this lecture called Give a Man a Job. And we're going to see that the media will not only be sympathetic to Roosevelt, the media will not only cater to his wishes, the media will outright glorify him as a hero. Okay? The video I'm going to show, Give a Man a Job, it's a brief musical newsreel about the New Deal, where they say things like, does the old name of Roosevelt make the old heart throb? And as you watch it, and I hope you do, I want you to keep in the back of your mind, if you're really liberal, what would you do if you saw this in a movie theater and it was about George W. Bush? Or if you're really conservative, what would you do if you saw this in a movie theater and it was about Barack Obama? See, understand, people just thought differently about politics then. Now, we'll save most of the New Deal for the next lecture, but I do want to at least touch what he immediately does, at the very beginning. And the benchmark that we have today for presidents is what can they accomplish in the first 100 days. The idea being, people, they take office, they've been elected, people like them, they've got political capital, this is where they can spend it. Well, that starts with FDR, who in his first 100 days, passed all sorts of legislation. He sponsors 15 bills, gets all of them passed. He starts doing worker programs, relief acts. He creates, in effect, his New Deal. Okay? As soon as he takes office in March, he orders all banks closed. And what he does is he does that and passes new banking legislation because he wants regulation. He wants stuff, to try to keep the banks from failing. And he realizes that's not going to do anybody any good if people are going to the banks and they're and they're closing on, failing. So he literally makes it where for a period of time, and I want to say it's like 10 days, but I can't remember, you could not go to a bank in the United States. They were just closed. He also then takes advantage of, again, roaring 20s, the fact you have radios. And he becomes the first president to speak directly to the American people. And this is why people loved him. Okay? People were literally bawling their eyes out in 1945 when he died. Okay? What he did is he had radio equipment set up in the White House. And on a weekly basis, I want to say it was Sunday, he began what he called fireside chats. The idea being the radio would be next to, the fireplace, and the family would gather and listen to music because there's nothing else to do. But his fireside chats, he would speak directly to you. He transformed himself from this uber-high authority figure to a father figure. He would say, my friends, many of you are worried, blah, 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 blah. This is what we are doing. He explained the legislation. Okay, rather than Nancy Pelosi's thing about Obamacare, you got to pass it to find out what's in it. I wish I could have said that in my dissertation defense. Instead, he says, here's what we're doing. I want this legislation to pass because here's what it's going to do. Here's what's in the bill. This is what I want. He gets the American people on his side, but also with the fireside chats, by reassuring people, he can start building up that consumer confidence. The thing is, before Roosevelt, people felt isolated from the government. Think about it today. If you get fired from your job, you can go collect unemployment. Okay? If, you're over 65, you can draw Social Security. If you're really poor, you can apply for Medicaid. There are safety nets. If you get hurt on the job, you can file workman's comp. There are safety nets by the American government. The government is there to help you at least to some extent. Rightly, whether or not they can do a good job of it, I don't know, but it's there. Here, there was none. So now you've got a place where you've just lost everything. The government might as well be in Timbuktu, Africa. By the way, that's actually a place. Whereas now, you have the President of the United States. Okay, and the way radios work, speaking into the radio, it's not this impersonal, televised appearance. The guy is literally holding a microphone and just talking into a microphone. And it's not scripted speech. He would do it, and he delivered it in such a way. And I'll try to, there's some on YouTube, I'll try to post a link. But he did it in such a way that it felt like he was speaking directly to you. It felt like, for the first time, the government is actually trying to help you. So he does that to ensure the American people. He brings up confidence. He, passes all of this stuff. And the New Deal is going to be a really significant changing watershed for the United States in reshaping the role of government, citizen interaction. But we'll save that for the next lecture, which hopefully I will do on Friday. I'll post that video to give a man a job. I'll see if I can't post some fireside chats. But take this away, and I'm gonna beat this dead horse into the ground. But the New Deal's not gonna end the Great Depression. Okay, World War II does. The New Deal will help it. The New Deal will help make it livable for many Americans. The New Deal will quite literally be the difference between life and death for many Americans. But the New Deal will not end the Great Depression. The only thing that ends the Great Depression is the Second World War, because you need a lot, you need a lot of new manufacturing jobs. You need a lot of other new jobs. And because you've got to win, doesn't matter about balanced budgets and any of that. You've just got to spend, 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 spend. So we'll save that for the next time. So as always, if you have any questions, let me know, and I'll catch you in the next video. Bye-bye.